Welcome to the Defense Priorities video series reviewing the key developments in U.S. foreign policy in 2025 and what they could augur for the coming year. I'm Dan DePetris, a fellow at Defense Priorities, and today Lyle Goldstein, DEFP's Asia Program Director, and I will be looking at what happened in Asia in 2025 and what we at Defense Priorities would like to see to advance a restraint-oriented U.S. foreign policy over the coming year. Lyle, thank you for being with us. I just wanted to get your take right off the bat. What do you think were the most important foreign policy events last year as it pertains to the Asian region? Please go ahead.
Okay, Dan. Yeah, thanks. It was certainly an eventful year, and I think one that I think had, let's say, a lot of surprises and let's say some close calls. I think let's keep in mind that we had two kind of, I'll call them small scale wars that blew up between India and Pakistan back in May, and then between Cambodia and Thailand. So, in the former case, now we're talking about nuclear power. So, this is something deserving of great attention. We might also remember at the beginning of the year, we had North Korean troops, quite involved in the Russia-Ukraine war. So, uh, quite a few disturbing developments from the point of view of regional and even global security. Um, However, if I were to pinpoint the kind of the big news story of the year, I think I would call it the year of geoeconomics, insofar as the U.S. China trade tensions were taking a center stage, and there was a kind of remarkable development, maybe even kind of world historical development, in that most of the time those pressures are going mostly one way. Pressures against the U.S. pressuring China to kind of let's say normalize the relationship in some ways. Um, However, in this case, China seems to have pushed back in a major way, and so a lot of experts in the Asia Pacific field were pretty shocked at how how stalwart, as it were, China seemed to be in its resistance to U.S. pressure, and frankly, how successful. And having just been in the region myself in November, I came away hearing many times that the Chinese side is feeling very, very confident. Now, at the end of the year, there are a lot of tensions were also blowing up in between China and Japan in particular. Uh, so, this is quite troubling, but we're also glad that Presidents Trump and Xi met in South Korea then at the end of October. So, a year of of troubling and new developments.
Going back to the U.S. China trade negotiations, which I believe are still ongoing. Would you sense that the Chinese are sort of learning from the U.S. playbook of export controls, trade restrictions, counter financial sanctions against certain U.S. defense corporations? It seems like the Chinese are kind of looking at what we've been doing economically against Beijing over the last 4 or 5 years and sort of turning the playbook against us. Do you think that's a fair assessment, or am I reading things too simplistically?
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it, Dan. I recall on previous visits to China, the Chinese side would often say, "Oh, Professor Goldstein, why is the United States putting so much pressure on our economy in terms of, of course, we've been talking about the restrictions on microchip technology for a long time, about a decade almost. So, but other, high technology across the board." Um, and it kind of came to the point where the United States was even looking for areas of vulnerability, as it were, choke points in the Chinese supply chain, so forth, where we could create pressure. But yeah, now the shoe seems to be on the other foot, and China, I think, yes, diligently kind of observing this process. Now, China on its own had executed, as it were, countermeasures or kind of aggressive economic strategies. You can remember even the episode with bananas in the Philippines or wine in Australia.
Right.
There was a rare earths episode with Japan way back in 2010. So I mean, this kind of uh, let's say playing the economic card is not entirely new, but the stakes here, I gather, were enormous, really, for both sides. And the pattern that I guess we in the China field have gotten pretty used to is that China would kind of shake its head and say, "Why are we doing this? This hurts both of us." But they would kind of swallow hard and say, "Okay, let's move forward." That's not what happened here. The Chinese seem to have pulled very hard on this rare earths chokehold that they have on our economy. And yeah, there's new news even out very recently that although it's what we all expected, that China has identified this as a vulnerability um, in the U.S. economy, or rather an area where it could kind of reign supreme in the world economy, and took a very strategic approach going back decades. Now that's sort of China's sweet spot. I think the U.S. is stronger on innovation, but China tends to have that strategic acumen where it can look sort of decades into the future. So yeah, I mean, we're in an interesting space here, Dan, where both sides have cards to play, and China has kind of shown its cards, and they're strong.
Yeah, Lyle, I want to go to Taiwan really briefly because I know much of your research over the last 12 months has been on Taiwan and the various aspects of Chinese policy towards the island, how the United States and the region might respond to a potential contingency on the island. As you know, a couple weeks ago we had a pretty significant Chinese military exercise around the island, utilizing various air assets and naval assets. I think 5 or 6 points along the Taiwanese coast, drilling specifically for potentially embargoing ports there. I was wondering, it seemed like this year was saw a pretty high uptick in those types of activities by the Chinese. Is this sort of a new normal? Because there was in the not so distant past, Chinese planes going towards Taiwanese airspace, or the identification zone around Taiwan was pretty rare. I would say over the last 2 or 3 years, it's sort of a regular occurrence. Do you see that continuing this year and getting worse, or what is your assessment on that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, one narrow point here is the air defense identification zone declared by Taiwan.
Mm,
It's not recognized by the PRC in any way, but just keep in mind that it's like a vast area. So
gigantic, right?
actually, intrusions into that area have been common, really, throughout. An uptick since the Pelosi visit, but what the I think people in the know, what they're really watching is the crossings of the median line. Okay, and the median line pre 2022, basically runs up and divides the strait in half. That was very rare, almost unheard of before 2022, and now this is becoming more and more common. And of course, that's very, very dangerous. So keep an eye on that. This year for Taiwan has been, in my view, yes, we've seen a significant uptick in the dangers. A lot of that, I think, is explained by politics in Taipei, actually, the capital of Taiwan, where they elected, or they have a new leader this year, Lai Ching-te, William Lai, of the DPP party, and he is, I would say, let's say, less moderate than his predecessor, and has been taking a lot of risks. At one point in the middle of the year, he gave 10 speeches, 10 consecutive speeches about why, essentially, why Taiwan doesn't need to declare independence because it already is independent. So, of course, that, naturally gets the Chinese all riled up in Beijing. And we've seen the consequences here at the end of the year when we had this, what amounted to a very robust set of exercises, testing a lot of, what I think are quite feasible scenarios for China to both execute coercion, but even, going toward an invasion. So, I remain very worried here. I will say, Dan, I was pleased to see some restraint on the U.S. side, what I perceived that way. There were some moves to downgrade the U.S. Taiwan relationship, which I think were well received on the Chinese side. And that's one reason the situation didn't get out of hand in 2025. So I hope that kind of restraint will carry through to next year.
Yeah, that's great. Well, speaking of next year, what would you like to see in the region going forward over the next 12 months? I mean, I'm sure you have a list of idealistic, optimistic scenarios on your desk. What are some of those items on the list, if you don't mind me
Mhm.
asking?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's one big event we didn't mention there, so let me just briefly cover that too. But speaking about Taiwan, the this happened in November when the new leader of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, she weighed in and said that Japan would come to the defense of Taiwan, that would be viewed as a direct threat to Japan, any kind of Chinese move against Taiwan. So that was a change, and I think has created a lot of the tension over the last several months. In 2026, um, I think there are some big opportunities um, in this region. I note that President Trump has let's say we can give him some credit for trying to bring peace to Eastern Europe and the Middle East, but not so successfully, I think. But to me, it's conceivable at least that the benefits in the Asia Pacific could be immense, right? I mean, China and the U.S., after all, the most powerful countries on earth, and the cost of conflict would be um, catastrophic. Um, so I would like to see the United States. Well, we have a meeting between Xi and Trump in April, so there is a big opportunity here. At their last meeting, they tended to focus on these geoeconomic issues. I think I would like to see more focus on the security issues here. Uh, I would like to see them take up the issue of nuclear rivalry and how this is developing and spiraling in a dangerous way. Possibly they could talk about the artificial intelligence angle generally, but also with respect to nuclear weapons. That came up in the Biden Xi meetings. Um, uh, Maybe more promising, though. Well, anyway, I think they must absolutely address the Taiwan issue here, and we may not even hear about what they discuss on that. So it's conceivable that both sides want to keep that quiet. But here, I would like to see the U.S. Really move to kind of extricate itself from this situation. It's incredibly dangerous. We really don't have any good cards to play. How can we do this? We can articulate and we can move toward a substantive upholding of the one China policy. That is, walking the walk here, not just giving it lip service, but actually acting as if Taiwan is a part of China. Um, we can decrease the constant congressional visits, which really irk China and actually put the island in danger. I think we could bring down the number of warship transits through the strait. I'm not saying they should stop, but it's an international waterway, but they could be decreased. And generally, I have to say, there's a massive U.S. military buildup underway all around Taiwan, especially in the area of the northern Philippines and the Ryukyu Islands of Japan. And China knows that's all aimed at a Taiwan scenario. So we'd be wise if we, decrease tensions by kind of, um, let's say, decreasing these deployments, which I think are, show that we are steadily preparing for a war with China over Taiwan, and that is extremely unwise, I think, and we are very much in danger of getting caught in a kind of escalation spiral. There are other opportunities around the region, uh, Korean Peninsula, consider that, or Southeast Asia and South Asia too, of course, but yes, Taiwan remains the flashpoint par excellence, and really the biggest danger I would submit to both U.S. national security and also global security. We've got to head off this war for sure.
Well, let's hope the Trump administration is listening to this video and taking your very pragmatic, astute advice. Dr. Lyle Goldstein, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for joining us today, everybody, and be sure to watch other videos in this series covering Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. Stay tuned to defp.org for more analysis from all of our leading experts. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.